March 27, 1977. On a runway hidden by drifting cloud, two Boeing 747s were moving toward each other, and neither crew could see the other aircraft. There was no catastrophic engine failure, no structural defect, and no storm in the sky. The danger was on the ground, created by pressure, confusion, poor visibility, and words that were not understood in time. Within seconds, the two largest passenger aircraft of their era would collide. 583 people would die, and 61 would survive the deadliest accident in aviation history. This is Case 003, Tenerife, a reconstruction based on the official Spanish investigation and the recorded communications from the final minutes. KLM Flight 4805 departed Amsterdam that morning for Gran Canaria. The chartered Boeing 747 carried 234 passengers and 14 crew members, 248 people in total. Pan American Flight 1736 had begun in Los Angeles, stopped at New York for fuel and a crew change, and continued across the Atlantic with 380 passengers and 16 crew members. Both flights were approaching the same destination, Gran Canaria Airport, on the eastern side of the Canary Islands. In 1977, the Boeing 747 still represented a new age of mass international travel. Seeing two of these enormous aircraft together at a small diversion airport was highly unusual. Then a bomb exploded inside the passenger terminal at Gran Canaria. A warning suggested that a second device might exist, so the terminal was evacuated and the airport was closed to arriving traffic. Aircraft already in the air needed somewhere else to land. Many were diverted west, across the water, to Los Rodeos Airport on the island of Tenerife. Los Rodeos was not prepared to receive so many wide-body aircraft at once. Its parking area filled quickly, and the normal flow of ground traffic began to break down. Built high on Tenerife's northern side, Los Rodeos was vulnerable to low cloud moving across the field. The terrain and Atlantic air could transform clear pavement into a closed visual world within moments. The airport had one main runway with a parallel taxiway, but diverted aircraft were parked in positions that blocked parts of the normal route to the runway. What began as an inconvenience became the first link in a growing chain. Every later decision would be made inside an airport operating far outside its usual rhythm. KLM landed at Tenerife at 13:38. Some passengers were allowed into the terminal, while the aircraft waited for news that Gran Canaria. Pan Am arrived later and stopped behind the KLM aircraft. Its crew would eventually be ready to leave, but the larger Dutch aircraft blocked the path ahead. When Gran Canaria finally reopened, the waiting aircraft began preparing to continue the short flight to their original destination. Before departing, the KLM captain chose to refuel at Tenerife. The aircraft received 55,500 liters of fuel, enough to avoid another crowded refueling stop at Gran Canaria. The decision was legal and the investigation did not classify it as a direct cause, but it added time to the delay and increased the aircraft's takeoff weight. Another pressure was building inside the KLM cockpit. New Dutch duty time rules were strict, and the crew knew that a further delay could force the flight to be cancelled. The KLM captain was one of the airline's most senior 747 pilots and a training captain. Experience was not absent from this cockpit. That fact would make the later decisions even more difficult to understand. At 16:56, KLM requested permission to taxi. By then, the weather was deteriorating, and the airport's unusual congestion required an unusual ground movement plan. Because the parallel taxiway was obstructed, both 747s would have to use the active runway itself as a taxi route. KLM was instructed to taxi along runway 12, continue to the far end, turn around 180 degrees, and line up for departure on runway 30. Pan Am was then told to follow the KLM aircraft onto the runway and leave it through the third taxiway on the left. The official report described Tenerife's weather as something more deceptive than ordinary fog. Low clouds were pushed across the airport by the wind, changing visibility suddenly and radically. A crew might see 500 meters or even a kilometer, Moments later, the same section of runway could disappear into visibility that was practically zero. The tower could no longer see either 747. The two crews could not see each other, and the controller had to understand their positions through radio reports. Los Rodeos had no surface movement radar capable of showing the controller where each aircraft was moving beneath the cloud. That left a shared radio frequency as the main picture of the runway. Every position report, instruction, readback, and pause carried more importance because no one could verify the complete scene with their eyes. The runway centerline lights were also out of service, increasing the visibility required for takeoff and making orientation on the pavement more difficult. Inside the Pan Am cockpit, the instruction to take the third exit created uncertainty. The crew counted intersections while trying to identify the correct turn through the cloud. They confirmed the word third with the controller, but the geometry ahead remained confusing. One exit required a difficult turn for an aircraft the size of a 747. The crew continued toward the next intersection, which appeared easier to negotiate and connected more naturally with the parallel taxiway. The Spanish board listed Pan Am's failure to use the third exit as a contributing factor, but emphasized that the aircraft never claimed the runway was clear and twice stated that it remained on it. Pan Am had not reported the runway clear. In fact, the crew continued transmitting that the aircraft was still taxiing on the runway. At the far end, KLM completed its 180-degree turn and faced back down runway 30, directly toward the hidden Pan Am aircraft. The first officer reminded the captain that they still did not have an air traffic control clearance. The captain acknowledged this and told him to request it. This distinction is essential. An air traffic control route clearance describes what an aircraft will do after departure. It is not permission to begin the takeoff roll. The tower issued KLM its route clearance toward the Papa beacon, followed by altitude and heading instructions for the flight to Gran Canaria. While the first officer read that clearance back, the KLM captain released the brakes. The engines began accelerating before a takeoff clearance had been issued. The readback ended with an ambiguous expression. The aircraft was now at takeoff. The controller interpreted this as meaning KLM was waiting in takeoff position. But inside the KLM cockpit, the takeoff had already begun. The aircraft was gathering speed on a runway whose occupied section was invisible. The following brief exchange is a transcript recreation based on the official investigation. It is not presented as original audio.
We are still taxiing down the runway. I will call you.
The two transmissions occurred at the same time. In the KLM cockpit, they produced a shrill interference tone lasting about 3 seconds, masking the warning at the worst possible moment. The controller then asked Pan Am to report when the runway was clear. Pan Am answered that it would report once clear, a message that was audible inside KLM. The KLM flight engineer questioned whether Pan Am had actually left the runway. The captain did not understand at first, so the engineer repeated the concern. The captain answered emphatically that it had. Neither the first officer nor the flight engineer challenged that assumption again. Investigators considered the captain's exceptional seniority and prestige. The authority difference inside the cockpit may have made it harder for the other crew members to insist. KLM continued accelerating. The heavy aircraft needed distance to reach rotation speed, while the Pan Am 747 remained directly ahead in the cloud. According to the cockpit recording analysis, the Pan Am crew saw the approaching landing lights roughly 9.5 seconds before impact. The Pan Am captain applied power and turned left, trying to drive the aircraft off the runway. There was almost no space and almost no time. The KLM captain attempted to lift off. The nose rose and the aircraft became airborne, but it could not climb high enough to clear the other 747. At 17:06 and 47 seconds, KLM Flight 4805 collided with Pan Am Flight 1736. The KLM aircraft struck the upper portion of Pan Am while only just becoming airborne. It continued beyond the collision before falling back onto the runway, where its large fuel load ignited. All 248 people aboard the KLM aircraft were killed. On Pan Am, 335 people died and 61 survived. The survivors were all from the Pan Am aircraft. Their escape took place amid fire, smoke, broken structure, and conditions that changed in seconds. The final death toll was 583. No accidental aviation disaster before or since has taken more lives. The investigation brought together specialists from Spain, the Netherlands, the United States, the airlines, and aircraft manufacturers. More than 70 officials took part. They studied cockpit recorders, tower communications, weather observations, aircraft performance, runway geometry, taxi instructions, and the decisions made during the delay. The evidence did not identify a mechanical failure that forced the collision. The disaster was produced by operational decisions and assumptions inside an abnormal environment. The Spanish board's fundamental finding was direct. The KLM captain took off without clearance, did not obey the instruction to wait, and did not stop after learning that Pan Am might still occupy the runway. Investigators examined the event from different national and operational perspectives, but the recorded sequence established the central fact. No takeoff clearance had been issued before the KLM aircraft began moving. The report also described pressures that may have influenced that decision: deteriorating weather, uncertainty about crew duty limits, concern for the passengers, and a desire to leave before another delay. But Tenerife cannot be explained by one sentence alone. Congestion, low cloud, ambiguous language, simultaneous transmissions, taxiway confusion, and cockpit hierarchy aligned into a single chain. Investigators recommended exact compliance with clearances and standard, concise, unambiguous aeronautical language. A clearance must sound different from every other instruction. They also recommended reserving the word takeoff for the specific takeoff clearance, reducing the chance that a route clearance could be mistaken for permission to move. Tenerife became a defining example in crew resource management training. Rank never cancels evidence, and any crew member must be able to challenge an unsafe assumption. The accident also remains central to runway incursion prevention, surface radar, clearer airport markings, and procedures designed to keep aircraft from sharing an active runway by mistake. Modern technology can reveal aircraft positions more clearly, but it cannot replace disciplined communication. Tenerife remains relevant because assumptions, time pressure, and authority still exist in every complex operation. 30 years later, families, survivors, rescuers, and officials gathered for an international memorial, an 18-meter spiral called Stairway. It is a fitting symbol for hundreds of journeys interrupted on an ordinary Sunday, far from the destinations those passengers expected to reach. Tenerife shows how aviation disasters rarely begin with one dramatic act. They grow through small uncertainties that remain unresolved until the safety margin disappears. The lesson is not simply to speak. It is to use exact words, confirm what was heard, question what is uncertain, and stop whenever the picture does not make sense. This was Case 003, Tenerife. Subscribe to Air Crash Evidence for verified aviation investigations, cinematic reconstructions, and the decisions that changed flight safety.